that father who didn't have a father, and you're not sure if you're doing it right, you're not sure, or maybe you do get it wrong sometimes, or you make a mistake.
Because human beings all are
exactly. Talk to them. Say, listen, I never had a dad. I'm navigating this the best that I can. If I talk to you a certain way, you do, talk to me. Tell me. You know, let us communicate about it and learn from each other.
And two, get inspiration from other dads who are doing it well.
Exactly.
Sometimes we're taking advice from people who, you're not in a family life, you pity them hate you, you not do a good job, you don't think mind your youth, sir. You don't tell me about my child, don't tell me about dog, me not pay for the extra lesson, them for go look work. Excuse me, can you not? Please, get away from me, okay? So, take advice from dads who are winning, who are doing it well, okay? And dads who, if your eyes should close tomorrow, you would actually want them to take care of your children. Because some people are giving advice to TK out of bad mind and being selfish. So when they see you going hard for your children, hear them, I'm not spoil no pitney. I'm not do that for my pitney. Not a problem. I'm doing it for mine. Okay? Yeah, I'm doing it for mine. So have a great day. Bye. Okay? Yeah. So, love upon the dads this morning, and I want to salute my wonderful husband. I tell him, if me have a father like him, probably would be an astronaut. Him just father something just. I mean, Mr. Ian Wilkinson, King's Counsel, sir. I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. And again, so today, let's love upon our dads. Send them some nice messages. Cook breakfast for them. Pack their lunch. Put a nice note in it, and let them know that they are appreciated and loved.
Good night. Welcome to another edition of Lead Story. We begin tonight in the Caribbean, and with a question that Jamaica knows very well. When crime spikes and public fear rises, how far can democratic states go before it begins to stretch its own constitution? This week, Trinidad and Tobago's parliament took a significant step, passing legislation in the lower house to enable so-called zones of special operation, or ZOZOs. For Jamaicans, that term is familiar and controversial. ZOZOs have been used here as an extraordinary security measure, blending police, military presence, and social intervention in communities experiencing extreme violence. We'll also be talking about what's going on in Barbados, as the elections there have been called by Prime Minister Mia Mottley. But those elections now might be the third time that Barbados now sees the Barbados Labour Party, headed by Mia Mottley, win again. Is that a democratic problem or just the stakes? And then we move you to global news, where we see what President Donald Trump, President of the United States, has now asked for. The Nobel Peace Prize is something that he has spoken of, comparing himself to Barack Obama, who won it in 2009. However, him not winning the Nobel Peace Prize has now led to conflicts from Venezuela to now what's going on in Greenland. And finally, we take you through the top 3 stories for you to know this week. This is Lead Story. Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story. You're looking at a situation that you know all too well here in Jamaica. ZOZOs, or Zones of Special Operation. And those are currently underway in Trinidad and Tobago as a conversation looms there. What do they do with their high crime rate? And are zones of special operation adapted from Jamaica going to be the answer? The opposition, through former Prime Minister Stuart Young, has asked what exactly is it that is hoped to be achieved. And he's been among the most vocal critics of ZOZOs, warning that they may breach Trinidad and Tobago's constitution and ultimately undermine public trust. So, Tonight we ask, what exactly is being proposed? What is the problem meant to solve? And what lessons, good and bad, does Jamaica's experience offer? Joining us now is reporter from hold on, let's be clear here. Senior reporter at TT Newsday, Jensen Levend. Jensen Levend, thank you so very much for joining us inside Lead Story. You're muted, Jensen, and so we're not hearing you clearly here in Jamaica as we find out how Zozos have made their way all the way to Trinidad and Tobago. Jensen, talk to us first from your perspective as you've been covering crime in Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago. How did Zozos get to be part of your national conversation?
First of all, one quick correction. I'm now at Guardian Media CNC3.
There you go, Guardian Media CNC3, Jensen Levend, yes.
How did Zozos come into being? It depends on who you're asking. If you ask the opposition, it's just to replace the state of emergency, which comes to an end in the end of this month. If you ask the government, it's to tackle crime and crime in targeted areas without having a state of emergency. But as you would probably be more aware than I, Zoso has a lot of similarities with a state of emergency. It's more like rather having the entire country in a state of emergency to specified areas, hence the zone of special operations. So that's what we're debating. The debate hasn't started yet in the Senate. That's what's supposed to happen sometime between tonight and early tomorrow morning. When it was passed in the lower house Saturday,
which was extraordinary for many Jamaicans, since we don't have parliamentary sittings on weekends and we don't have them unless they are incredibly urgent in the night. What led to the Zozo being something that, with a 27-11 vote, happened on a Saturday?
Well, the debate started on Friday night. They had other debates that took time. It was very strange that it took that long to bring that legislation, given that, yes, the others were important, but Zoso was the most talked about legislation to be debated on that day. And it only came into Parliament like after 8 in the night, and it went until, I believe it was 2:30 on Saturday morning. Probably some people were a bit tired, so the debate wasn't as festive, if you want to use that term, as other debates that we have seen in the past. But yeah, they went until in wee hours of Saturday morning to ensure that the bill got passed. They knew going in that they had the majority to pass the bill.
And that is that is the United National Congress, the UNC, currently in power in Trinidad and Tobago, yes. Yeah,
the government knew going in that they had the support. What they need now is the support of the independent senators, at least 4 of the 9 independent senators, to side with them to allow this bill to pass. We've seen in the past the independent senators being criticized, chastised, demonized, if you want to use that word, by the government, and still turning around and supporting the government and the legislation that they brought. As recent as yesterday, the Prime Minister says that she does not have faith in the independent senators that they would side with the government in bringing this piece of legislation. So even now we have to wait and see if the independent bench would side with the government or side with the opposition.
This is not the first time we've seen this, though, from Kamala Persad-Bissessar, chastising the independent senators and then seemingly forcing them into proving her wrong by doing what it is that she said. Because in her statement, she also said that she saw them as aligned, and so she said of the president as well, with the opposition People's National Movement. Does that mean then that you and other Trinidad and Tobago citizens might be concerned that these independent senators are going to once again have to prove her wrong by doing what it is that she wants? That is passing the Zozo legislation?
I want to take myself out just for a second. Independent senators, even in Parliament today, express serious concerns over the Prime Minister's statements. The opposition, we would expect, would be concerned about that, and they have voiced their concerns. But the independent senators are very wary of the Prime Minister's comments. And as you said, this is not the first time the Prime Minister would have alluded to the independent not being independent, solely because the president who appoints independent senators was once a member of the now opposition. So there's this belief that every member that the president appoints is tainted by the PNM brush because she has PNM history or opposition history. I honestly believe the bill will be passed. I could be personal here. I believe the bill will pass. I believe they will get the support of the four independent senators that they need. Why would they bend, quote unquote, to the Prime Minister's taunting? That's for them to decide and for them to say, but I fully believe that they will support this piece of legislation.
Well, former Prime Minister Stuart Young is one of the most vocal critics of this zone of special operation legislation. Let's take a listen to what he has to say as he stood in Parliament and pushed back on what he called effectively the crime plan for the government. Language that Jamaicans here would have been very, very aware of. Well, unfortunately, we don't have that clip playing right now. That would have taken us through what was said by Stuart Young. But he indicated in that clip from Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago that this was even more draconian than the state of public emergency, taking even more powers from citizens, taking more of their constitutional rights. But at a time when Trinidad and Tobago is now experiencing a spike in crime. What's the general sentiment on the ground? Even with the concerns that are being raised about what the Zozos could bring as Trinidad and Tobago deals with its own crime escalation problem?
Well, one of the things that we must identify with the former Prime Minister's comments is that he said in Parliament that a similar piece of legislation was proposed when they were in government, and he was one of the people who rejected it. So that's important detail that
he's being consistent across the board, effectively.
Yeah, that this piece of legislation is not what we need. We went into some of the areas that we suspect that the zone of special operations will take effect, and these are the hotspot areas. One area in Indigo Mountain, the west part of Trinidad and Tobago, said that. One area was saying that whilst the crime rate has reduced in that community, they expect, based on history, that they will be classified as a zone of special operations. There is the fear by some, and you see it on social media, you'll hear it when you're walking around, that it will be targeting more so the opposition areas. And many of the opposition areas or the opposition controlled areas have been historically high crime areas. So it's a belief that these areas will be targeted by the special operations. And there's the whole, and the government tried to dissuade us, there's the whole belief that because these areas that are controlled by the opposition are high in Afro Trinidadians, that there is some sort of a race factor. And we'll see the government through the Defense Minister Wayne Sturge seeking to debunk that. But that is one of the serious fears that many people who have expressed their concerns, particularly on social media, would have raised. And that is an issue that came up in 2011 when there was a state of emergency and the anti-gang legislation came into effect. And a lot of people, over 100 people were arrested and charged with being gang members. And 99.9% of those cases fell flat.
So this is then a similar situation that has happened here in Jamaica, a similar response in the zones of special operation and similar pushback as to some of the constitutional and legal concerns. We certainly look forward to finding out what happens in Trinidad and Tobago. You didn't have that Senate meeting today to discuss it just yet. It might happen tonight, it might happen tomorrow, as we see if it passes muster, especially what happens with the independent senators, something Jamaica isn't very familiar with at all. We have our senators along party lines here, but we're certainly going to be watching to see if you've learned from our lessons from the zones of special operation. Jensen Levend from Guardian CNC3, thank you so very much for joining us inside Lead Story.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. See, look at how similar we all are. Jamaica putting in place one solution, Trinidad and Tobago trying it out. But that solution was deemed problematic by some here. So we're looking to see if they will be taking the lessons we learned from Zozos. Up next, elections are now called in Barbados. What exactly does that mean as Mia Mottley seeks to gain her third term? Does it even make sense? And could she be even going after the position of UN Secretary General? We'll talk about that next inside Lead Story.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The time by the Office of the Prime Minister is...
Every dream conquered is another dream gained. I land and I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction, 'cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard, and the music keeps on playing, and the people them I say we are my show tonight. Oh, what a feeling! Don't stop dreaming. Keep on believing in the power of the feeling. Whatever you want, take a chance. Song in your heart, step in your dance. You got a spark, don't fit it down. Shine your lights on.
Go buy your Miracle Fire Rub for all arthritis, pain, swelling, poor circulation, numbness, inflammation, cold and flu, stroke, stiffness, sprains, strain, boils, insects, bites, and menstrual discomforts. Miracle Fire Rub, available at King Street Pharmacy, 72.5 King Street, downtown Kingston, Case Pharmacy, Duhaney Park Plaza, Kingston and Fontana Pharmacies nationwide, and March Pharmacy, downtown Kingston. Miracle Fire Rub. Rub it on, the pain is gone, gone, gone.
We turn now to Barbados, where voters are heading back to the polls sooner than expected. Prime Minister Mia Mottley has called what have been dubbed snap elections for February 11th, seeking a third term in office. On paper, this is entirely constitutional. Politically, however, it raises deeper questions about democratic competition. The opposition Democratic Labour Party appears unprepared for these elections. And after two consecutive clean sweeps, there's a real possibility that the Barbados Labour Party, headed by Mia Mottley, could win every seat again. Supporters argue that this reflects strong leadership and effective governance. Critics ask whether democracy can remain healthy without a viable opposition. And this is happening against a backdrop of rising costs of living and persistent rumors that Prime Minister Mia Mottley may be positioning herself for a future run at the United Nations Secretary Generalship. So tonight we step back from the headlines to ask, why call elections now? How engaged are Barbadian voters? And what does one-party dominance mean for accountability in a small democracy? Joining us is political analyst Kevon Edie in Barbados. Thanks for joining us, Kevon.
Hey, Jodi-Ann. Good evening, Jamaica. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's not Christmas, but it is for me.
Is this your birthday today, Kevon?
No, not my birthday, no.
But
My birthday's in
election time.
October. Election time, election time,
So
election time.
the bells have rung there in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's take a quick look at the moment that Prime Minister Mia Mottley called elections in Barbados. All right, unfortunately, that clip is unable to be played this evening. But when Barbados heard that they would be having elections on February...
And I told him this, listen to this. 200 years ago, General Lafayette gave Simon Bolivar a medal with George Washington.
Well, unfortunately, the wrong insert was played a moment ago. That is not Mia Mottley, and that is not what we were talking about. But Mia Mottley, there with bells clanging there at the Westbury Primary School, made the announcement that Barbados would be going to the polls. Kevon Edie, you said you called it on social media when the elections had then been named. Why did you think it would be happening so early?
Well, before we get to that, I just want to say that theoretically, this would not necessarily count as a snap election. I think most Barbadians would have already understood that this year was really a general election year. The last election would have been held in January 19th, 2022, so 4 years ago. And generally within Barbados, our elections tend to fall within the fourth year of a leader's tenure. Because also as well, we are having our Diamond Jubilee in November for our 60th anniversary of independence. So I don't suspect that Prime Minister Mottley would have wanted the election to go too deep within those celebrations. So realistically, I figured it would have been within the first half of the year anyhow.
But what was your response now to the announcement, not only that the elections had been called, but that there was quite a narrow window between the elections being called nomination day and now election day, now set for February 11?
Well, the thing is, under the Representation of the Peoples Act here in Barbados, the law speaks to elections being held no less than 21 days from the dissolution of Parliament and the issuance of the writs. So that puts us at around 25 days, 24, 25 days. So it does fall within the legal parameters of when a general election should really be held. But in terms of my reaction, like I said, I wasn't necessarily surprised. Really and truly, the Prime Minister would have hinted for the longest time that elections would have been coming soon. And over the last few months, she would have looked at, as we would say in cricket, shoring up her wicket by bringing some fresh new blood into the party. We've had a recent by-election in May. And since May, we would have had 4 to 5 new persons, 4 stalwarts leaving the party, going on to retirement, and new persons coming in. So really and truly, it really was expected. But for many Bajans, I could presume that it would be a bit of a surprise to them in that regard. But generally, I wasn't necessarily surprised.
You weren't surprised, but the Democratic Labour Party, the opposition that did not win any seats in the last election and did not win any seats in the election before that, represented now by opposition leader who had switched sides in order to become opposition leader there in Barbados, is now having to prepare for an election. Now, the DLP appears to be unprepared, even though they've lost twice, and for many are forecast to lose again. How competitive then is this election realistically for us watching here in Jamaica?
I think that before I can answer that, I think really and truly there should be additional contextualization for this. Now, Barbados traditionally have always had competitive elections. We've generally had a general two-term alternation between the two sides. What happened in 2018 really was a misnomer because generally similar to most others in the Caribbean, both parties generally enjoy, one could argue 40% support from their base, and then generally 20% would more often than not depend where the pendulum would swing. Now, as it pertains to this election, I think that one can argue that this is a very crucial election for the Democratic Labour Party. We've had instances where parties would have come and went due to our nature of our two-party system, and they've generally, for the most part, recovered or have some semblance of representation in their respective legislature. But for the Democratic Labour Party, they have been shut out of Parliament for the most part until Ralph Thorne crossed over in 2014, and they've been plagued for the last few months with a very messy leadership battle, which resulted in many of their members being locked out of their conference back in September.
And it was also very public as well, Kevon Edie. That is, people were watching. It wasn't an internal battle that wasn't before the public. It was so public, in fact, that person said that the DLP, the opposition, was not ready if any elections were to be called. Now that they have been called, is this going to be a competitive election?
Well, I mean, I don't suspect it would be. I think that the Democratic Labour Party, they can pick up 2 seats if, depending on, because 3 weeks is a long time in politics, So I think there are 2 seats they can possibly pick up, maybe in St. Lucie and one of the other bellwether seats in St. Philip. But it really, really depends on if the National Party, the central party, and more so political leader Ralph Thorne, if he can galvanize the troops to go to the polls. Because really and truly, yes, we would have seen 30 seats flip in one direction, but the Democratic Labour Party supporters, they haven't disappeared. Many of them just opted to just not vote.
Let's talk about that then, Kevon Edie, because if the DLP supporters, the opposition supporters, haven't disappeared, but they were not inclined to lend their support in vast numbers for the last election or the election before that. We're looking at an election now. There's a health question that is being asked, which is how can a system remain healthy when effective opposition is absent? Even if elections are free and fair, even if you titularly have Ralph Thorne, King's Counsel, now as opposition leader, you still have a situation where for the potentially third term, they might not even pick up those 2 seats.
Yeah, I think within our system, it is one of a zero-sum game, and it's also one which can reward parties and also punish them, and punish through our vote as the electorate. And I don't believe that Barbados is in a state where, democracy is in peril. I don't believe democracy is in peril. I do think, though, that for persons who don't necessarily agree with the Labour Party, I think there are other methods that Barbadians would have utilized to voice their displeasure. We have a number of third parties coming up through the ranks at this point in time. Whether or not they're going to be successful remains to be seen, but based on prior history, the only successful third party we've had in Barbados would have been in the NDP in 1991.
So some time from now then, and some removed from now. Before you go, Kevon Edie, because you're saying to us now the DLP might not be competitive, the Barbados Labour Party headed by Mia Mottley might be winning its 3rd term. There's a regional and international dimension to this, that there's ongoing speculation that Mia Mottley has an interest in becoming the UN Secretary General and taking on that role. How is that being received domestically?
Well, I would like to firmly say first and foremost, as it stands here in Barbados, Prime Minister Mottley has not indicated her intention to pursue the candidacy. But I think within Barbados, she hasn't declared her hand as a candidate. But for many persons in Barbados, depending on who you ask, some persons may see that rumor as, as it is unsubstantiated. Others may see it as a natural progression of her as a leader, especially as someone who's always been vocal for the different international causes. But I really and truly, I think at the end of the day, Barbadian voters are going to vote on bread and butter issues, and I don't necessarily believe the potential of Mia Mottley's candidacy would move a needle from many people, as there are other main issues that they're looking to be voting on.
Well, it's certainly going to be something that we watch as the first CARICOM election for 2026 gets underway. Kavan Edie, political analyst and clearly a fan of elections all across the region. Thank you so much for joining us inside Lead Story. All right, so that is our discussion about what's going on in Barbados. We're going to open the aperture a little wider now, moving you to what's going on around the world and why President Donald Trump not getting a Nobel Peace Prize is a through line through several stories, including Venezuela, Greenland, and now tariffs. We'll speak with someone who is really watching this from the United States next inside Lead Story.
Do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out. Don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30.
Everybody want to see if a country right now.
One thing about Jamaicans, we might have differences, but we know when something is good for all of us. And when we work together against crime and violence, we are stronger than ever. And that's how we know the Citizen Security Plan can work.
That one that name CSP.
The Citizen Security Plan is an initiative of the Ministry of National Security in partnership with the European Union. It's an all-of-government effort to create safer streets and build stronger communities. Go to mns.gov.jm to learn how you can play your part.
If you're a woman in business, it's time to go bigger.
Your ambition is calling, and Horizon for Women in Business is answering.
Horizon, a new loan product from Access Financial Services designed for women entrepreneurs to unlock the capital you need to grow and take your business beyond limits. With quick approval, flexible repayment, and low interest rates, your success is on the horizon.
Call us now. The funds are waiting.
Your success is on the horizon.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVMTV.
So much more than entertainment.
Good evening, and this is our deep dive tonight. In January 2026, global politics took a turn that few would have predicted, but many are now struggling to contain. We saw the convergence of three things: a U.S. president's long-standing desire for the Nobel Peace Prize, an aggressive push for territorial control over Greenland, and a military intervention in Venezuela that removed Nicolas Maduro from power. Together, they have produced a moment that raises serious questions about how power is being exercised and how peace is being defined. Joining us to discuss these developments, we have international business lawyer from Miami, Florida, in the United States, Marlon Hill. Good evening, Marlon, and thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story.
Boy, are we taking a deep dive in the Arctic or the Antarctica?
Well, maybe we go to the Arctic first, and then since Antarctica is a little closer to Greenland, we better take a look there as well. There are many places for us to look, Marlon Hill, as we watch this story unfold. Let's start off first with President Donald Trump indicating that Maria Corina Machado, the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize winner, is the person that he believed should have not won. Instead, it should have been him. And she then went ahead and gave her prize, she said, to President Donald Trump earlier this year. Let's take a look first at what that looked like, why she did it, and what you make of now the Venezuelan opposition leader attempting to curry favor with President Donald Trump.
I presented the President of the United States the medal of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I told him this, listen to this. 200 years ago, General Lafayette gave Simón Bolívar a medal with George Washington's face on it. Bolívar since then kept that medal for the rest of his life.
We do know he wanted the prize himself. We should note the Nobel Committee has made clear the Peace Prize cannot be shared or transferred after it is awarded by the Nobel Committee. The meeting comes as the White House says Trump stands by his assertion that Machado does not have the support necessary to lead Venezuela. Just yesterday, the president called Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, of course, Nicolas Maduro's former vice president, a terrific person following a phone call. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the current Venezuelan government has been extremely cooperative.
So you're hearing now what only happened a few days ago. We're in the 900 days of January because we're first making reference to the removal of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife from Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez being placed as interim president, and President Donald Trump indicating that he thought she was a great woman. Maria Corina Machado, who had been a long-standing ally of the United States, now not being the replacement for Nicolas Maduro, and a woman who some has called desperate, now offering her Nobel Peace Prize to President Donald Trump, with the Nobel Prize Committee saying she can't actually do that. What was your response and reaction to all of this, Marlon Hill?
Well, you use the right word, curry favor, and you must be careful what you use with curry, right? And how much curry you put in your chicken. Everything with our president, Donald Trump, as a real estate developer and a business person, is viewed from transactional lenses, right? And unfortunately, that has geopolitical implications, especially when you're carrying the reins of power with a country like United States. And so everything these days, lead story listeners, are transactional in the geopolitical world, including in our own Caribbean Sea, as it pertains to Venezuela. Maria Machado will have to determine for herself her own political future in terms of how she wants to make this transactional. And she's learning from advisors that she needs to offer something to get something. And that is what we're seeing play out in front of our eyes.
She's offering something, but she's not getting something. She had dedicated.
Well, we don't know.
She had dedicated the Nobel Peace Prize before when she received it last year to President Donald Trump. He thanked her for it. It didn't go anywhere. Then, with the removal of Nicolas Maduro, she had hoped to be put in power along with Edmundo Gonzalez, who won the elections as her candidate there in Venezuela because she was prevented from running. But it doesn't seem that she is visibly benefiting, and in fact, seems to be doing more and more things to get in the favor of President Donald Trump. But he has publicly said she doesn't have the support on the ground to run Venezuela. Is this some benefit that she could be getting?
No, but you have to understand that many times in these diplomatic discussions, some of the things you see visibly and some of the things that you don't see behind the scenes. You have to also understand that Maria is a pretty smart woman. She wouldn't be in this position as opposition leader by not being astute. Right? She already knows that the Nobel Peace Prize is non-transferable, but the gesture is something that she's using as a chit in this transactional discussion of geopolitical powers as the leadership for Venezuela moves into the phase on behalf of the interests of the United States from the lens of the president.
Well, we're looking at another thing that has happened with the Nobel Peace Prize, because yesterday, on January 19th, a text message from U.S. President Donald Trump now indicated that we are in a whole new space, indicating that to the Norwegian president that the failure to receive the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize is now the push in his decision to escalate for Greenland. He wrote, and I quote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for not having stopped 8+ wars, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace." And this is something that's big news, because the Prime Minister of Norway seems to have had multiple conversations with President Trump, making it very clear that he is not responsible for the very insulated Nobel Committee making decisions. But yet President Donald Trump is holding him accountable. What do you make of that?
You know, our presidents and our prime ministers are all human people with feelings that can be hurt or that can be soothed by whatever transactional offerings that we may have. You know, my late grandmother from Hanover always used to say that cockroach don't business in
fowl fight. So,
okay,
but,
all right. So when the
who
big
is the
boys,
cockroach and who is the fowl? What are the bigger powers that we're looking at?
I'm not going to point any fingers. I think our listeners lead story listeners are quite astute themselves. They'll be able to understand exactly what it is that I'm saying. But my point being that the geopolitical forces of these big European powers and American powers or Western powers, the real casualty in these transactional geopolitical forces are vulnerable states like us in the Caribbean and small economy states, as they are fighting over who should be awarded and who should have whatever title, and if I don't get that, then I should have this, and I've given you all of this support for NATO and I deserve this. Again, my view, President Trump is like any other human who has his strengths and his weaknesses. It's transactional in my view. And this is going to have tremendous repercussions in our global economy. And that is my biggest concern.
Well, let's listen to President Donald Trump as he now reacted to not only sending that message to the Norwegian Prime Minister, but then still holding him accountable.
Should have gotten the Nobel Prize for each war, but I don't say that. I say millions and millions of people. And don't let anyone tell you that Norway doesn't control the shots, okay? It's in Norway. Norway controls the shots. They'll say, we have nothing to do with it. It's a joke. They've lost such prestige. That's why I have such respect for Maria doing what she did. She said, I don't deserve the Nobel Prize. He does. When she got it, they said, wow, that's amazing. I thought President Trump would get it. President Trump does.
Well, you're hearing President Donald Trump now saying that he should have got it for each of the wars he claims he had stopped, 8 in total. Currently, we're looking at 3 of those back on India and Pakistan, saying that he had nothing to do with them. That's 4 others unsettled in where they are. But he's gone on now, Marlon Hill, to say that the reason he's pushing for Greenland is because Norway, which he says controls the Nobel Committee, even though they've made it clear they do not, didn't give him that prize, so that is his reason for the push for Greenland. Connect those to me if you can.
You should believe the president when he says something. Typically, it may not make sense to you, but it makes sense to him. It's been my experience having, as a global citizen, watching the manner in which he approaches certain policy and the way that he leads, that he believes in certain things, and he's the president. That's what he wants to believe. The reason why he wants Greenland, then that's his reason. And the same reason that he may, in terms of what's happening with Venezuela, when he says he's going to do something, more often than not, that's what he says the true part out loud. And for some people that are in the throes of geopolitical leadership, transparency is a good thing, right? You need to know exactly what it is that you're dealing with. And the President Trump is making it very clear when he's not happy with something, and the vulnerabilities and the impact of that, let the chips fall where they may.
Marlon Hill, this though has tariff consequences. President Donald Trump threatening tariffs now on all the European nations that are not in support of his push for Greenland, including Norway and Denmark. Keir Starmer from the United Kingdom saying that friends don't tariff friends, pushing back on what Donald Trump has said. A 10% tariff now going up to 25% if by June they still don't get it together and allow for him to take Greenland from the Kingdom of Denmark. What does that mean as you're in the United States now for persons watching and saying more tariffs are being applied, even as the U.S. Supreme Court was supposed to hand down a decision about tariffs and his ability to hand them down, that's been postponed. Where are we now?
The United States has a long-standing alliance with NATO and the European countries, and when these big boys go into a foul fight, unfortunately it's a lose-lose situation, not only for the economies of those countries, but also more importantly for smaller economies like ours. It's a lose-lose situation. The financial markets don't like it. The volatility, the instability in knowing what the cost of certain goods are going to be. Economies don't grow when you have tariffs, the economists will tell you. And we're already in very precarious economic times, and we can't afford to dig the hole any deeper. So I'm hoping that this transactional tit for tat is going to be settled behind the scenes, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail. I don't know which head we're going to refer to, but I'm hoping that we don't have to impact our economies in this way over something such as this.
Well, we'll certainly be watching this, and since Marlon Hill has been so good about taking us through all these big stories, perhaps bringing him back inside Lead Story with us to talk about them. International business attorney from Miami, Florida, Jamaican roots clearly, with his grandmother from Hanover, but still speaking to us from the United States and helping us understand the vantage point from that country. Thank you so much for joining us inside Lead Story.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to take a break and take you through the top 3 stories you need to know for this week. What's going on again with President Donald Trump? What did Canada do? And why is the world now looking at the biggest free trade agreement ever? 25 years it took to be settled, but at a time like this, it means big things. We'll talk about those next inside Lead Story.
Hi, I'm Landy. Welcome to NLA Connect, the National Land Agency's customer engagement platform. NLA Connect is a simple, user-friendly platform designed to help you share your feedback, get support, and updates about land-related matters. Available 24/7, NLA Connect allows you to share suggestions, comments, and commendations, submit queries and report issues, attach files with your requests, track requests and get real-time status updates, connect with NLA client engagement officers, and provide feedback on the service received by the platform. We're making it easier for you to connect with us. You can access NLA Connect via our website, using the kiosk at any of our offices, or scanning the QR code displayed at our locations. Need any help along the way? Check out our FAQs section. It has all the answers you need in one location. NLA Connect, your voice, our priority.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVMTV.
So much more than entertainment.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yeah.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
We close tonight with our top 3 global stories and what they mean for small states like Jamaica. Story number 1, Trump, Gaza, and the Board of Peace. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced the creation of a U.S.-controlled Board of Peace, a body that would oversee the rebuilding of Gaza. Membership of this new board, however, comes at a steep price. $1 billion per country. Critics say this effectively creates a pay-to-participate system of post-conflict governments run outside of the United Nations. Let's take a listen to this report.
Right now, very, very murky, I have to tell you. The initial understanding here in this region is that the Board of Peace was supposed to be, as you said, overseeing the operations of the technocratic new administrative government inside Gaza. But when you look at what the Board of Peace appears to be offering leaders, in addition to demanding a $1 billion investment in a slush fund that Trump alone would run, it doesn't even mention Gaza. And so the understanding is that Trump is attempting single-handedly to put in place something that his advisors, Steve Bannon and Miller, have suggested, which is basically, without openly saying so, to replace the UN or significant parts of the UN. And that is why France, in its response, mentioned that it continues to believe in the UN Charter. That may have irritated Donald Trump himself or some of his advisors, but regionally, we really do not know how this could operate, how this may come into being. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said he's been invited, but he hasn't shown any of these letters like other leaders have. And today we found out through Jackie Huli, the Haaretz correspondent, the Israeli newspaper correspondent, that Israel seems to be preventing the entry into Israel of this Palestinian technical.
So you're watching then the creation of the Board of Peace. Nobody's jumped on board so far, with Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, not jumping on board there. There's a big discussion about whether it is that he'll even allow this board to run. But we're also looking at pressure on small states, and that's why we raise something like this, because small states have to watch something like this parallel system that's being set up counter, some argue, to the United Nations, where small states do get a voice and do have power. But if you're not a small state that can afford $1 billion, and I'm not quite sure Jamaica could run it, not only to stay on this Board of Peace for the 3-year term, but also to continue to use it as a permanent membership platform, there are real concerns that have to be addressed there. And so small states, therefore, are looking at something like this inside the Board of Peace and wondering where they fall. All right, now we move to our second story. Canada reorienting away from the United States, as Canada is quietly repositioning itself in a changing world order. Prime Minister Mark Carney has signaled a strategic shift, reducing reliance on the United States and expanding engagement with other global partners.
$1 billion in wages are earned each year by Canadians because of our existing trade relationship. And this is a relationship that has been distant and uncertain for nearly a decade. That has held back investment, it's stalled business growth, and cost Canadian workers good opportunities. And it has had the consequence of leaving us even more dependent on our largest trading partner. And that's why immediately after the election, Canada's new government began to recalibrate our relationship with China, strategically, pragmatically, and decisively.
Strategically, pragmatically, and decisively. The World Economic Forum is currently underway in Davos, Switzerland as well, with many world leaders making it very clear they want their voices to be heard. But even as close U.S. allies are diversifying, small states must ask, where do we place our bets now? And how do we protect our autonomy? Let's listen to what Prime Minister Carney had to say today.
It seems that every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they can and the weak must suffer what they must. And this aphorism of Thucydides is presented as inevitable, as the natural logic of international relations reasserting itself. And faced with this logic, there is a strong tendency for countries to go along to get along, to accommodate, to avoid trouble, to hope that compliance will buy safety.
It does not buy safety. And that is the concern that had been raised today by Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. Another big story, and closing out our top three today, the EU-Mercosur deal has now finally been signed. After 25 years of negotiation, the European Union and Mercosur have finalized a major trade agreement, making it one of the largest trade blocs in the world. And it will reshape supply chains, agriculture, and manufacturing for Jamaica and CARICOM. The risk is trade diversification, because we are going to be losing market access as larger blocs deal directly with each other. More in this report.
After 25 years of talks, the EU has finally signed a major trade deal with South America's Mercosur nations. These include Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. The deal will create a free trade zone of roughly 700 million people, gradually eliminating about 90% of tariffs across the industrial, services, and agricultural sectors.
We choose fair trade over tariffs. We choose a productive